Good evening, one and all. We welcome you all to the International Webinar Series on Holistic Health, Well-being and Sustainable Development 2024, commemorating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, nation celebrating 77 years of independence, and United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2015 to 2030 as part of awareness and campaigns in collaboration with Sri Holistic Health Foundation India and Sri Research Institute Center for Arts, Sciences and Wellbeing. Before we start our sessions, let's take the blessings of Almighty as we are celebrating and commemorating 10th International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, Global Commemoration and Action. And the theme for 2024 is Safety of Journalists in Crisis and Emergencies 2024.
कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शत्रुबुद्धिविनाशाय दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः
With the blessings of Almighty, with the blessings of Almighty, we shall continue with today's sessions and commemorations. Today, we are commemorating 10th International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. Every year, on 2nd November, International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists is celebrated. This year, for 2024, the theme is Safety of Journalists in Crisis and Emergencies. Ending impunity for crimes against journalists is one of the most important and complex challenges of recent times. It is an essential precondition to guarantee freedom of expression and access to information for all citizens. With the rise of conflicts and other crises, the 2024 observance seeks to promote a broader discussion on the safety of journalists working in these contexts, including the prevention, protection, and prosecution concerns of journalists affected by such challenges. Many journalists, media professionals, and associated media personnel exercise their duties in highly dangerous contexts. Too many pay an unacceptably high price, including death, enforced disappearance, torture, unlawful detention, and kidnapping for producing independent, reliable, and verifiable information. Journalists reporting from crisis and conflict zones face severe threats in carrying out their critical work. While from 2017 onwards, UNESCO recorded gradual decreases in media workers killed in conflict zones, most recently, the trend has been reversed. UNESCO's monitoring in 2023 recorded more than 50% of journalist killings occurred in the crisis and conflict zones, with continuously high numbers in the first half of 2024. So these tragedies are only the tip of the iceberg. Media infrastructure is often damaged or destroyed, and journalists face physical attacks. Detention, equipment confiscation, or denial of access to reporting sites. Many are forced to flee or cease their work, risking turning conflict areas into zones of silence. Whether reporting on conflict, humanitarian disasters, climate, or health crisis, journalists continue to face disproportionate threats and higher levels of impunity for extrajudicial killings, torture, and enforced disappearances. And so, whether reporting on conflict, humanitarian disasters, climate, or health crisis, journalists continue to face disproportionate threats and higher levels of impunity for extrajudicial killings, torture, enforced disappearances, and arbitrary detention, as well as intimidation and harassment, both offline and online. 153 journalists have been killed in the line of duty in 2022 to 2023, as per UNESCO 2022 and 2023 report. 117 journalists were killed in 2020, 2021. These are reported stats, unreported maybe much more, many times higher. In 2020 and 2021, Latin America and the Caribbean accounted for 38% of killings, followed by Asia and the Pacific with 32% of the killings. Day 14, only 14% of cases of crimes against journalists are currently considered judicially resolved. In 2021, the percentage of the women among all journalists killed among is almost doubled, rising to 11% from 6% of the previous year, as per UNESCO 2022-23 report. So impunity for attacks on journalists has a chilling effect on society. Latin America and the Caribbean continues to be the region with highest number of murders of journalists, according to the 2022 UNESCO Director General's report on the safety of journalists and the danger of impunity. Since 1993, more than 1,700 journalists have been killed for reporting the news and bringing information to the public. In 9 out of 10 cases, the killers go unpunished, according to the UNESCO Observatory of Killed Journalists. Impunity leads to more killings and is often a symptom of worsening conflict and the breakdown of law and judicial systems. While killings are most extreme form of media censorship, journalists are also subject to countless threats, ranging from kidnapping, torture, and other physical attacks to harassment, particularly in the digital sphere. Threats of violence and attacks against journalists, in particular, create a climate of fear for media professionals. Impending In many cases, threats of violence and attacks against journalists are not properly investigated. This impunity emboldens the perpetrators of the crimes and at the same time has a chilling effect on society, including journalists themselves. UNESCO is concerned that impunity damages whole societies by covering up serious human rights abuses, corruption, and crime. On the other hand, justice systems that vigorously investigate all threats of violence against journalists send a powerful message that society will not tolerate attacks against journalists and against the right to freedom of expression for all. The UN Plan of Action of the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity is the first concerted effort within the UN to address attacks and impunity of crimes against journalists. With a multi stakeholder and holistic approach, it brings together UN bodies, national authorities, media, and civil society organizations. Since the plan was adopted, the issue of safety of journalists has gained a higher visibility in the UN, as evidenced by the increasing number The United Nations General Assembly proclaimed 2nd November as International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. In General Assembly Resolution 68 by 163, the resolution urged member states to implement definite The landmark resolution condemns all attacks and violence against journalists and media workers. It also urges member states to do their utmost to prevent violence against journalists and media workers to ensure accountability, bring to justice perpetration of crimes against journalists and media workers, and ensure that victims have access to appropriate remedies. It further calls upon states to promote a safe and enabling environment for journalists to perform their work independently and without undue interference. Diego Luna, the Mexican actor, producer, and advocate for the freedom of expression, believes independent journalism is essential, especially in countries like Mexico with a high level of impunity. The documentary film State of Silence, produced by Luna and directed by Santiago Maza, portrays the risk really that many Mexican journalists live in. For the UNESCO Director General's report is a unique mechanism within the UN system for monitoring the killings of journalists. It was first published in the 2008. The report is submitted every 2 years to the International Program for the Development of Communication. Journalism is an essential but dangerous profession. Journalism is fundamental for sustainable development, human rights protection, and democratic consolidation, but remains a dangerous and too often deadly profession. And 9 times out of 10, the murder of a journalist is unresolved. According to the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, according to the United Nations, UNESCO Observatory of Killed Journalists, more than 1,600 journalists have been killed since 1993. Other threats against journalists, online and offline, continue to grow, especially in non-conflict zones. Journalist imprisonment is all at a record high, while online violence, particularly against women journalists and harassment spurs on self-sponsorship, self-censorship, and in some cases, physical attacks. Journalists have also increasingly been attacked while covering protests by various actors, including both security forces and protest participants. Numerous reports and studies confirm that threats inordinately affect women journalists and those who present minority groups. So stop targeting truth and truth tellers. As journalists stand up for the truth, the world stands with them, as quoted by Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General. So the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the Issue of Impunity, aiming to create a free, safe environment for journalists and media workers. In 2012, the United Nations developed a participative and multi-stakeholder manner, the first ever systematic global The plan was the result of a process that began in 2010 upon the request of UNESCO's Intergovernmental Program for the Development of Communication, IPDC. It was then endorsed by the Chief Executive Board of the United Nations and launched in Vienna at the second UN Interagency meeting on the safety of journalists in November 2012. The plan calls for a collision between the holistic approach to implementation, which is coordinated by UNESCO as a UN specialized agency in the field of promotion of free flow of information. It includes 6 areas: raising awareness, standard setting and policy making, monitoring and reporting, capacity building, and research. Thousands of activities at the global and country level has taken place to implement this plan as reflected in the dedicated news letters and through various information sources. So the first 10 years of UN Plan of Action on the safety of journalists and the issues of impunity have seen significant improvements in promoting a safer and enabling environment for journalists and media workers. Despite shrinking press freedom, reduced public trust in professional journalism, and the disruption of media business tools. Among these are digital challenges such as digital surveillance, online violence, and cybercrimes, particularly affecting women journalists. The increasing prevalence of disinformation and hate speech, and the exponential growth in digital technologies giving rise to concerns about the misuse of digital platforms and the role of internet companies in mediating freedom of expression and the safety of journalists. These challenges further include the use of strategic lawsuits against public participation, in short known as SLAPs, which are often aimed at journalists to prevent them from reporting on matters of public interest or the increasing need to provide emergency assistance to journalists in both conflict and non-conflict settings. During the Universal Periodic Review under the Human Rights Council, UN member states are evaluated on their performance on freedom of expression and the safety of journalists have recently been provided with tools of best practices in that regard. Strengthening the implementation of the plan in the next decade, therefore, requires addressing these emerging challenges. The UN is actively working to protect journalists. This is evidenced by increasing number of declarations, resolutions, and other normative tests. The UN Secretary General's latest report on the safety of journalists and impunity and his call to action for human rights protecting journalists is also part of the 2030 agenda for the Sustainable Development. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, is mandated to promote and protect the effective employment, enjoyment by all of the human rights, including the rights of journalists and media workers. OHCHR works to implement General Assembly and Human Rights Council mandates on the safety of as a UN agency with a specific mandate to promote the free flow of ideas by word and image, UNESCO works to promote the safety of journalists and combat impunity for those who attack them. This includes training of judicial actions and security forces on international standards in freedom of expression, access to information, and the safety of journalists. One of the main goals of the UN Plan of Action is to raise awareness on the importance of independent and professional journalism. International days such as World Press Freedom Day, which is celebrated on 3rd May, and the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists on today, that is 2nd November, encourage discussion and analysis and promote initiatives related to the freedom of press and the safety of journalists and issue of impunity. UNESCO figures show that 2023 has been particularly a deadly year for journalists who work in conflict zones, with killings almost doubling compared to past 3 years. The 3 months of this last 3 months of this year in particular have been the deadliest quarter for journalists in conflict zones since at least 2007, with 27 deaths. Threats which create zones of silence. The figures do not include deaths of journalists and media workers in circumstances unrelated to their profession, which have also been reported in significant numbers in 2023. And these tragedies are only the tip of the iceberg, with widespread damage and destruction of media infrastructure and offices, many other kinds of threats such as physical attack, detention, the confiscation of equipment, or denial to access to reporting sites. Large number of journalists have also fled or stopped working. Such a climate contributes to what UNESCO is terming as zones of silence. opening up in many conflict zones with severe consequences for access to information, both for local populations and the world at large. The worrying trend comes despite a noticeable decreases in overall journalist killings worldwide. Compared with last year, 65 compared with 88, the global trend can be explained by a significant decline in killings outside of conflict zone, which have reached their lowest total for the last at least 15 years, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, where 15 killings were reported compared with 43 in 2022. The International Program for Development of Communication, in short known as IPDC, promotes media development within developing countries, countries in transition, and the countries in conflict and post conflict situations. As the only multilateral forum in the UN system designated to mobilize the international community around media development, the program provides support for media projects while seeking accord to secure a healthy environment for the growth of free and pluralistic press. Knowing the truth is protecting the truth. UNESCO publishes its latest figures on journalist killings and impunity. In 2022, UNESCO Director General's reports on the safety of the journalists and the danger of impunity highlights when coming to safety of women journalists, globally, women journalists and media workers face increasing offline and online attacks and are subject to disproportional and specific threats. The gender-based violence they are exposed to implies stigmatization, sexist hate speech, trolling, physical assault, rape, and even murder. UNESCO advocates for the safety of women journalists and collaborates with partners to identify and implement good practices and share recommendations with all parties involved in countering attacks against women journalists as recognized by numerous resolutions. UNESCO published the chilling a study on global trends in online violence against women journalists, which demonstrated the extent of attacks against women journalists and impact on their well-being, their work, and press freedom at large. They work with partners to develop practical tools for journalists, media managers, and newsrooms to respond to online and offline abuse. UNESCO partnered with specialized organizations to train women media workers on the ground and also through massive online training courses and work with security forces to sensitize them on freedom of expression with gender focus. When we look at the world trends in freedom of expression and media development, independent journalism is in peril, faced with the erosion of business models, increasing crackdowns on press freedom, and ongoing threats against the safety of journalists. The global community must act swiftly to protect and promote press freedom and public access to the free, independent, and pluralistic news media. In order to effectively respond to these urgent challenges, we must first understand them. The World Trends in Freedom of Expression and Media Development series analyzes trends in media freedom, pluralism, independence, and the safety of journalists. The global report, published every 4 years since 2014, provides a macro level perspective that informs UNESCO member states, international organizations, civil society groups, academia, and individuals seeking to understand the changing global media landscape, issue briefs, and other publications in the World Trends Report series offer additional insights into new and evolving challenges in the field of freedom of expression and media development. The report is funded by UNESCO's multi-donor program on freedom of expression and safety of journalists. Technology facilitated gender-based violence in an era of generative AI. Freedom of expression and safety of journalists. To train them, UNESCO and partners offers courses to train journalists, judicial operators, UN staff, civil society, and other actors to increase their understanding on international standards on freedom of expression, access to information, and press freedom. The complexity of attacks against journalists and the evolving challenges to their safety as UN agency in charge of promoting the safety of journalists and combating impunity of attacks against them. UNESCO courses are also capacity building resources to enable a safer environment for journalists to work. Various courses like Global Multilingual MOOC for Judicial Actors, UNESCO and Bovnero Institute of Human Rights at the Faculty of Law, University of Oxford, will be launching a new version of Global Multilingual Massive Open Online course for judicial actors on international and regional standards on freedom of expression and safety of journalists. And the course will be available in English, French, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, Russian, and Portuguese. This free 5-week online course will be run between 29th May and 30 June 2023 and so on. So UNESCO and the United Nations System Staff College course, the free self-paced online course is open to different UN stakeholders, but is particularly aimed at UN resident coordinators, human rights advisors, and UN country teams. The module also includes issues such as how to address hate speech and disinformation while respecting international human rights standards and role of media during elections and the United Nations human rights monitoring mechanisms. Information and elections in the digital era. This self-directed course features course content from the Knight Center for Journalism in America's massive open online course titled Information and Elections in the Digital Era. The 5-week course is available in English, Spanish, French, Portuguese. How to report safely, strategies for women journalists and their allies, developed in cooperation with the International Women's Media Foundation and the Knight Center at Texas University, is now available as a self-directed course. take the course and learn frameworks to mitigate and manage associated risks for women journalists, available in French and Spanish. International standards in the freedom of expression, MOOC developed with the Bonavero Institute of Human Rights at the University of Oxford, available in English, covering the COVID-19 vaccine, what journalists need to know, developed jointly between UNESCO, UNDP, WHO, and the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas at the Universities of Texas, Austin, co-funded by the European Union, is available in English, Spanish, French, Arabic, Chinese, Russian, Portuguese, and Hindi. Disinformation and fact-checking in times of COVID-19 in Latin America and the Caribbean, prepared for journalists and communicators in general, but open to anyone interested in tackling COVID-19 disinformation. The course is done in partnership with the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas with support from the European Union, available in Spanish, Portuguese, and Guarani language. Journalism in a pandemic, covering COVID-19 now and in the future. The self-directed course helps journalists to improve their coverage to pandemic, launched by UNESCO and WHO, are organized by the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas and at the Universities of Texas, Austin with support from the European Union and UNDP, available in Arabic, English, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish. Legal challenges related to freedom of expression amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The webinar series is a resource for judicial operators on legal challenges related to the freedom of expression in relation with the COVID-19 pandemic, organized by UNESCO and the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas, the Bonvero Institute for Human Rights, and the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, in partnership with the Inter-American, African, and the ECOWAS Court of Justices and the Office of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, available in English, French, and Spanish. International and African legal framework on freedom of expression, access to information, and the safety of journalists is also accessible as webinar modules. Module 1, the right to freedom of expression. Module 2, the right to freedom of expression. Part 2, Module 3, the safety and security of journalists and the protection of their rights. Module 4, the African legal framework and access to information. These are the various capacity building courses that were offered by UNESCO. Between 2006 and 2024, over 1,700 journalists have been killed around the world, with close to 9 out of 10 cases of these killings remain judicially unresolved, according to the UNESCO's Observatory of Killed Journalists. Impunity leads to more killings and is often a symptom of worsening conflict and the breakdown of law and judicial systems. UNESCO is concerned that impunity damages whole societies by covering up serious human rights abuses, corruption, and crime. Government, civil society, the media, and everyone concerned to uphold the rule of law are being asked to join the global efforts to end impunity. It is in recognition of the far-reaching consequences of impunity, especially of crimes against journalists, and that the United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 68 by 163 at its 68th session in 2013, which proclaimed 2nd November as International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, in short known as IDEI. So the resolution urged member states to implement definite measures countering the present culture of impunity. The date was chosen in commemoration of the assassination of two French journalists in Mali on 2nd November 2013. Every 2 years, the awareness raising campaign for the commemorations of the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists coincides with the findings of the UNESCO Director General's report outlining the current state of global and regional impunity. There's a story behind the story. Every 4 days, a journalist is killed while searching for the truth. 85% of these deaths remain unpunished. We won't let them go unnoticed. On the occasion of the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, UNESCO is launching a global campaign calling for justice. It's time to change the story. It's time to end impunity. The 2024 UNESCO Director General Report on the Safety of Journalists and the Issues of Impunity, the latest UNESCO data on killings of journalists show that the global impunity rate for journalist killings remains shockingly high at 85%. On 2nd November, UNESCO renews its call for all unnecessary measures to ensure that crimes committed against journalists are properly investigated and their perpetrators identified and convicted. So 2022 saw the highest killings of women journalists since 2017. 10 number of women journalists were killed. And impunity for crimes committed against journalists has significantly decreased 86% in 2022, while UNESCO is working on to end impunity for crimes against journalists. The Observatory of Killed Journalists is monitoring the killing of journalists and media workers across the globe. This observatory provides updated information on killing of the journalists since 1993 and on the judicial status of condemned cases since 2006. It also provides public access to country responses to UNESCO's request for information into the judicial status of ongoing and unresolved cases. This observatory makes publicly accessible UNESCO's work on monitoring and reporting on the safety of journalists as well as global impunity for these crimes. Data which is largely collected through the Director General's report on the safety of journalists and the danger of impunity. It forms an essential part of the implementation of UN Action Plan on the safety of journalists and issue of impunity. So when we look at the statistics, 61 journalists killed this year and 1,721 journalists were killed since 1990. When we look at the geographical statistics, out of total 1,336, 66, the judicial status of various cases remain like this. So 13.62% were only resolved and no information received so far was 26.94%. Ongoing unresolved cases were 55.71% and others were 3.73%. UNESCO condemns the killing of journalists. If we see the killings by year, in 1993, 2 journalists were killed. In 1995, 33. In 1996, 70. In 1997, 10. In 1998, 2. In 1999, 6. 2010, 2001, 17. 2002, 6. 2003, 16. 2004, 48. 2005, 42. 2006, 84. 2007, 66. 2008, 46. 2009, 77. 2010, 68. 2011, 63. 2012, 124. 2013, 90. 2014, 99. 2015, 116. 2016, 102. 2017, 81. 2018, 99. 2019, 57. 2020, 62. 2021, 55. 2022, 88. 2023, 74. 2024, 61 journalists were killed. And these are the statistics as reported by the UNESCO's report. So total killings in conflict zone is 50.8% and total killings in non-conflict zone is 49.2%. And coming to gender-wise statistics, killings, journalist killings by gender statistics, female 7.73%, male 92.27%. And coming to judicial status, of the total 1,512 cases, new requests were 9.66%, resolved were 12.3%, no information received so far were around 24.34%. Ongoing unresolved cases were 50.33% and others were 3.37%. So UNESCO research reveals sharp increase in the use of financial loss to silence journalists. A new UNESCO report highlights an alarming increase in instances of allegations of financial wrongdoing designated to pressure, intimate, and silence independent journalists and media outlets in the last 3 years. Of 120 cases reviewed by UNESCO dating from 2005 to 2024, 60% occurred between 2019 and 2023. So journalists play a crucial role. Journalists play an essential role in society investigating wrongdoing and advancing transparency. They should never be targeted with unfounded allegations of financial crimes or subject to legal harassment to silence them. This undermines press freedom and freedom of expression for all of us. UNESCO calls on its all member states to safeguard journalists from the practice, as quoted by UNESCO Director General Audrey Azoulay. Extortion, tax evasion, and money laundering are the most frequently misused charges brought against journalists and media outlets. Other misuse charges include blackmail, terrorism, financing, fraud, embezzlement, and illegally receiving foreign funds. All these attacks seriously erode public trust in journalists and media outlets. A tactic to deprive journalists or media of resources. Unlike in libel and defamation cases, financial charges can often be brought without establishing any connection between the editorial content produced by the journalist or media outlet and the charge itself, obscuring the real motive behind the charge. The instigators of financial charges against journalists and media outlets are most often the state actors. Executive powers can also instruct administrative bodies such as fiscal authorities to launch investigations directly, thus bypassing the scrutiny of the judiciary. The misuse of financial legislation can allow authorities to freeze a journalist or media's outlet assets, reducing their livelihoods and impeding their ability to continue reporting while they await trial. This can lead to the closure of media altogether when key staff are detained or have their assets frozen. The threat of bankrupting individual journalists or media organizations can also lead to further censorship. Some regions are more affected than others. The UNESCO report identifies at least 5 cases in Latin America and the Caribbean over the last 3 years, compared to only 2 cases during the previous 10 years. In Africa, at least 8 occurred between 2019 and 3 and 2023, compared to 7 during the previous 10 years. Of the cases in these two regions, tax evasion and extortion were the most frequent charges brought, and 9 people received jail sentences, the highest sentence being 12 years. The issue is more prevalent in Eastern Europe, Asia, and the Pacific, particularly Central Asia, with 41 cases reviewed between 2020 and 2024, compared to 19 cases from 2008 to 2020. The trend has been in evidence since the early 2010s. In South Asia, extortion charges have been misused since the mid 2000s, and restricting foreign funding or charging independent media outlets with funding terrorism is also common. Such harassment frequently comes during times of protest, during electoral campaigns, and in lead up to major international events. When the host country and the government will receive increased international attention, the proliferation of legal attacks against journalists is a new threat, which includes a range of criminal allegations. The data presented in the policy brief is based on what information was publicly available, combined with desk review and interviews with lawyers, journalists, and press freedom experts. The actual number of cases is likely to be higher. The report builds on analysis produced by UNESCO on the growing trend in the legal harassment of journalists in 2021 and in 2000, 2022. UNESCO's data is based on the assessment and analysis of 120 public cases. There is likely to be significant underreporting. Coming to the safety of journalists, promoting the safety of journalists and combating impunity for those who attack them are central actions within UNESCO's support for press freedom and freedom of expression. UNESCO protects journalists by spearheading the UN Plan of Action and on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity in line with the relevant international commitments. UNESCO monitor and report on the killings as reflected in the Observatory of Killed Journalists and by periodically requesting member states to provide information on the status of judicial inquiries into these cases. UNESCO build and develop national and regional capacities to prevent, protect, and prosecute attacks against journalists, advocate to take into account the specific risks women journalists face, and support legal protection of journalists worldwide. UNESCO lead the commemorations of World Press Freedom Day and the International Day to end impunity for crimes against journalists and develop knowledge, resources to understand and address the challenges. There are various reports like knowing the truth is protecting the truth, protect journalists, protect the truth, punish the crime, not the truth. Time to break the cycle of violence against journalists. And apart from that, there are various other reports like Director General's report on the safety of journalists and the danger of impunity in 2022, 2020, 2018, 2016, 2014, 2012, 2010, 2008, and so on. The UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the Issue of Impunity, aiming to create a free and safe environment for journalists and media workers, thus strengthening peace, democracy, and sustainable development worldwide. The UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the Issue of Impunity addresses the fundamental aspects of prevention, protection, and prosecution. The plan is calling for a coalition-based and holistic approach to its implementation. It includes 6 areas: raising awareness, standard setting, and policy making, monitoring and reporting, capacity building, research and coalition building. According to the UN Plan of Action, UNESCO cooperate with governments, media houses, professional associations, NGOs, and other stakeholders to end impunity. This year is the 10th anniversary of the UN Plan of Action. In the past 10 years, the plan has contributed to the launch of a multitude of networks, bringing together a wide array of relevant stakeholders to foster a safer environment for journalists and media workers. So, on the main ambitions of the UN Plan of Action is to sensitize the public as well as the key stakeholders and partners on societal importance of independent and professional journalism. UNESCO, in association with member states and other UN agencies, organize international days such as World Press Freedom Day on May 3rd and the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists on November 2nd. These serve as tools for discussion, analysis, and development of both international and local initiatives related to freedom of press, safety of journalists, and the issue of impunity. So this year, Director General's report on the safety of journalists and the danger of impunity, published on occasion of International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, as per the report, journalists at the front lines of crisis and emergencies highlights the UNESCO Director General's report on the safety of journalists and the danger of impunity, published on occasion of International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, 2024. The highlights of the 2024 report on the safety of journalists and danger of impunity. Killings of journalists rose 38% to 162 journalists killed. Every 4 days, journalists are killed for seeking truth. Decrease of impunity rate in cases of killed journalists is at 85%. The impunity rate remains unacceptably high. 4 years is a long time for cases to be resolved. This is the average time it takes for cases which have been resolved to get the state's justice delayed is justice denied. Increase in state reactions to the Director General's request for information is 77% from 65%. Increase in the killings in countries experiencing conflict and indirect conflict situations is around 72 killings. Increase in killings preceded by disappearances, missing persons reports, and kidnappings, 13 killings. Increase in deaths in custody, 5 killings. 2022 saw the highest killings of women journalists since 2017, with 10 killings. So journalists research, write, edit, and publish news, features, and articles. Their work appears on television, radio, magazines, journals, and newspapers, both in print and online. Now we have uh, online media and social media as well. A good journalist has a solid ethical foundation when it comes to reporting on everything from business news to politics. Fairness, honesty, and impartiality are essential. While many people associate journalists with reporting on breaking events from across the globe, the education required to become a newspaper reporter or a journal is the same, a degree in journalism. Read the accounts of journalists who were murdered or wounded while carrying out their duties. It is important we honor and acknowledge the lives lost in the pursuit of justice. Consider watching movies based on journalism, such as The Post, The Insider, The Citizen Kane. Not only are these critically acclaimed films, but they provide unique perspectives on journalism. Make people aware of this day by sharing and posting on online media and social media with the hashtags truth never dies or end impunity, which is an important to never forget the injustice faced by those fighting for a good cause. Women dominate journalism school and college students but lack exposure in the actual journalistic industry. No major news organization employs more than 49% of the women, and women journalists are still rare. 84% of the Pulitzer Prize winners were men. Statistics show that women have traditionally had a difficult time breaking into the male dominated journalism industry. Just 16% of the Pulitzer Prize winners were women during the first century. Because freelance writers aren't required to record their income, it is impossible to measure their marketability. The analysis shows that since 2008, freelancing rates have risen substantially. Only 40% of the journalists use Facebook to interact with their audiences. However, 83% of journalists says Twitter is vital for growing readership. So journalists value Twitter the most than any other social media. Newspaper readership has declined since 2008 when the digital media began to dominate, and this trend is expected to continue, making print newspapers a luxury commodity reserved for subscribers. Journalists are more than just writers, editors, and newscasters. Journalists are society's watchdogs. They are the most conspicuous supporters of the First Amendment of right to free expression. Anyone who considers themselves a journalist adheres to code of ethics. It is comforting to know that there is something put in place to ensure we have unbiased and unethical news reporting. Journalists must give a balanced viewpoint since they are dedicated to discovering and communicating the truth to the public. The news provides individuals with the most up to date information, accessible, allowing them to make educated choices about all areas of their lives. Today is also commemorated as Broadcast Traffic Professionals Day, also known as National Traffic Directors Day or National Professionals Day, which is celebrated every year on November 2nd to commemorate the first ever radio broadcast in the US, which occurred on November 2nd, 1920. This day is celebrated to mark this landmark and acknowledge and appreciate the hard work of broadcasting professionals who work behind the scenes and provide us with their services. Broadcast traffic professionals work diligently on shows, announcement, news, commercials, and talk shows to keep us entertained and engaged. And this day is celebrated to honor their hard. Reginald Aubrey Fessenden broadcasted the first known radio program in the US from his experimental station at Brand Rock on Christmas Eve in 1906. The program consisted of two music selections, the reading of a poem and a short talk which ship wireless operators heard within several hundred miles. After the conclusion of World War I and the subsequent relaxation of radio restrictions, many operated experimental radio stations whose range was only a few miles. The first commercial radio station was KDK in Pittsburgh, which aired on the evening of November 2nd, 1920, with a broadcast of the returns of Harding Cox's presidential election. KDK broadcast and the musical programs initiated after it was a significant success, motivating others to install similar stations. By the end of 1921, a total of 8 stations were operating in the US. This year's 1921 and 19, the years 1921 and 1922 saw a rise in the sale of radio receiving sets and component parts required for the home construction of sets, which was followed by a large increase in the number of transmitting stations. By November 1st, 1922, 564 broadcasting stations were licensed. In 1927, Congress passed the Radio Act and sets up the agency, which is now called the Federal Communication Commission, FCC, which allocates wavelengths to broadcasters. So broadcasters have been an integral part of our lives. They work tirelessly to provide us with their services. This day is to acknowledge and appreciate their work. Broadcasting has a rich history that evolved through time to be as it is now. This day celebrates the evolution of the broadcasting and the comfort it has given us through the ages. Music is an integral part of broadcasting and is intricately intertwined with it. This day celebrates the music introduced to us through broadcasting services. So with this, we shall end today's commemorations. And if anyone would like to share their experiences, you are welcome. You can share your details in chat box so that we can invite you, or otherwise we can move on to other commemorations. Okay, today we are also commemorating World Ballot Day, which is a floating day, and its date is set by several ballot companies annually. This year it takes place on November 2. Ballot, which can be traced back to 15th century, is an intricate and artistic dance from that involves precise light and graceful movements and gestures performed to music. World Ballot Day is a special occasion for people around to celebrate this well-loved art. Today, ballet takes different shapes and styles, with the rules being a little less rigid than that were in the past. Costumes vary based on creativity, and classical music is no longer the mandatory genre of music it is performed to. It has also given life to a new dance forms such as contemporary, lyrical, modern, and neoclassical dance. Today is also commemorated as World Number Day, which is observed annually on the first Saturday of November, which takes place on November 2nd. This year, the numbat, also known as banded anteater or walpurti, is an insectivorous marsupial that almost exclusively eats termites. The numbat is considered the faunal emblem of Western Australia. This species was once widespread in southern Australia, but is now limited to a few small colonies in Western Australia with an estimated wild population of less than 1,000, which makes it as an endangered species. It's protected by different conservation programs. Recently, numbats have been reintroduced to fenced-in nature reserves in South Australia and New South Wales. On World Numbat Day, conservation groups raise awareness about this amazing mammal. They also raise funds for researching and protecting it. Zoos in Australia also participates via special exhibitions with images of the numbat. World Numbat Day is a day that celebrates unique mammal emblem of Western Australia and encourages conservation efforts. The founder and origins of the day is still unknown. The numbat, also known as a band anteater or walpurtid, is an insectivorous marsupial. Its diet consists almost exclusively of termites. This species was once widespread in southern Australia but is now limited to few small colonies in Western Australia. Therefore, it is an endangered species and is protected by different conservation programs. Unlike the most other marsupials, the numbat leads a daily life mainly due to restrictions of the special diet. Numbats are not big but have 5 toes on their front paws and 4 on their hind legs. However, like other mammals and that eat termites or ants, the numbat has a degenerate jaw with up to 50 small non-functional teeth, and although it can chew, it rarely does. The main reasons for the decline in its numbers are loss of habitat and being eaten by foxes brought by Europeans in 1800s. So numbats uses its sense to smell to find shallow and unfortified underground galleries that termites build between the nest and the feeding place. It eats 20,000 termites daily. The adult numbat spends most of its time searching for termites. During the breeding season, the female and male vocalize by producing a series of soft clicks. The breeding season is in February and March. Numbat gestation lasts 15 days, and as a result, 4 babies are born. The animal was discovered by a research team that explored an urban valley under the leadership of Robert Dale in 1831. So it's a chance to get introduced to these unique, cute animals. You'll fall in love immediately. Just like all other animals, numbats have their role in the ecosystem, which includes keeping termites in check and control. Dedicating a day to these endangered species helps maintain the balance of our world. Learning more about numbats and their roles will help you sincerely appreciate how beautiful the nature is. Today is also commemorated as All Souls Day and also commemorated as the Day of Dead. It is a centuries-old tradition in Western Christianity to observe All Souls Day on November 2nd by attending masses, offering prayers and sacrifices, and lighting candles to help ease the suffering of those who have died without having been saved and whose souls are believed to be in purgatory. In a looser interpretation, many people who are not strict adherents to church doctrine still may set this day aside to contemplate their families or social circles departed in solemn remembrance and honor. Today is also commemorated as Be the Impact Day on November 2nd. Pat Miller, the International Executive Director of Pure International Pigeons, founded this day is set aside for individuals to do something good in their community. You get to decide what to do and how you want to make a difference in your community. You can volunteer, donate, or start a project to give back to the community. We all owe world a debt of gratitude and share equal responsibility to make it a better place. This day is about leaving the world a much better place. Today is also commemorated as Dynamic Harmlessness Day, which is observed on November 2nd every year. It's a day to remember J. Dan Dinshaw, the founder of American Vegan Society. Dinshaw coined the term dynamic harmlessness, which is used by people who practice nonviolence. If you ever wondered why vegans eat the way they do, this is philosophy that led them to become vegans. So let's learn more about dynamic harmlessness and how to incorporate into your daily routine. November 2nd, the day after World Vegan Day, is Dynamic Harmlessness Day. After learning the benefits of sticking to a variety of plant foods and avoiding any animal products, the next step on the vegan path is to learn how to apply ahimsa in your daily life. The Sanskrit word ahimsa, which means non harming, is the basis for the concept of dynamic harmlessness, while the term used to have negative connotations such as thou shalt not. Mahatma Gandhi changed it to emphasize a more positive perspective of constructive action. This is where the idea of causing the least amount of suffering comes into the play, with the goal of removing as much pain, death, and harm as possible and replacing it with help, kindness, and goodwill. This is something that many vegans, including J. Dinshaw, can relate to. Dinshaw was the first to introduce the concept of dynamic harmlessness to the vegan community, and Dynamic Harmlessness Day promotes the practice. Dinshaw and his wife founded the American Vegan Society based on these beliefs, and he has always advocated for a more positive rather than a negative approach to the world, encouraging non harm when it comes to what people eat. The American Vegan Society established a day on Dinshaw's birthday to promote his ideas to others because he promoted the philosophy throughout his life. As a result, dynamic harmlessness has become a very popular concept among nonviolence advocates. Donald Watson is called the father of veganism. While Watson was not the first to advocate for a completely plant based diet, he and his wife Dorothy invented the term vegan back in 1944 in the West. Watson began to reconsider his meat eating habits. He became a vegetarian when he was 14 years old, making a New Year's pledge to never eat meat again. After learning that the production of milk related items was likewise unethical, he gave up dairy products 18 years later. A vegan diet that incorporates eggs isn't technically vegan. It is known as ovo-vegetarianism. Some vegans, however, are willing to include eggs in their diet. Egg laying is, after all, a normal function for hens that causes them no harm, but is still not technically vegan. Vegans annually save the lives of over 30 animals, so return to the wild. Being vegan reduces your carbon footprint by half and more. Vegans help save over 1,100 gallons of water daily. Vegans are less vulnerable to heart diseases, and vegans save over 45 pounds of grains daily. This day enables people to live more natural and healthy lifestyle. This encompasses a wide range of topics, including good nutrition, the production of healthier foods without the use of artificial fertilizers and pesticides, exercises, and rest. This also helps in promoting the advantages of meaningful work through collaboration rather than rivalry. It provides helpful ways to do more good, organizing events that promote a positive ahimsa message or transferring knowledge on the horrors of exploiting animals. Today is also commemorated as Look for Circles Day in US. A circle is a shape where all the points in the shape are equidistant from a given point, which makes the center. This day is celebrated across the country and is set aside to look for circles in the world around us. This day is meant to be a fun activity for kids and adults alike. In addition to being a fun day outside, the day helps young children to learn identify shapes, which is an important part of their development. Circles are used extensively in art as well, and many cultures have used circles to represent important values and ideas artistically. Rotation, revolution, and other circular movements are important to everyday life, and as a result, the circular shape can be found easily in modern life. Circles and spheres are easily seen in nature, from the rings of tree trunks to drops of water. Today is also commemorated as National Bison Day in US. You see them everywhere on points, sport team logos, and a couple of state flags. This honor is reserved for American bison, an annual event that falls on the first Saturday in November. All Americans should reflect on the impact bison has part of their environmental and cultural heritage. By native people central to their survival as both food and spiritual inspiration. If a bison tail is hanging down and moves naturally from side to side, the animal is relaxed. But when the tail stands straight up, it's a signal that bison is getting ready to charge. So watch the tail. Given their size as the largest mammals in North America, bison are surprisingly agile with an ability to swim well, jump up to 6 feet, and run between 35 and 40 miles per hour. Bison have always roamed in Yellowstone National Park as evidenced by the prehistoric fossils found in modern times. They are oldies but goodies. Herds of bison can be found in all 50 states. The American bison is not only the country's official mammal, the bison is also the state mammal of Wyoming, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Native peoples once lived their lives around the vast herds of bison that swirled around areas of west and northwest, the central plains, and the southeastern US. Once pioneers started their westward trek, both the Native American tribes and the bison herds were seen as obstacles to progress. As the native peoples were systematically forced off their lands by either poachers or fake government treaties, the bison herds began to disappear. By earlier part of last century, bisons were on the way to extinction. Today, through the collective efforts of Indian tribes, wildlife associations, the national park system, and others, bisons have re-emerged as a protected species. And joining us in today's commemorations, we request everyone to quickly fill up the feedback form, which has been shared in the form of polls to mark your attendance and also participation. So see you all tomorrow at the same time. Take care. Good night.